How far are you guys from East Plano, Texas?
Dude, that's my backyard. When you said East Plano, I was like, Plano? Holy crap. That's literally 20 minutes from here.
Yeah, dude.
Man.
I'm in McKinney. I'm the city. There's McKinney, Allen, Plano.
You can go over and see this. You can go over and see if they're doing construction.
You know, what they're doing essentially is an intentional community. That's what they're trying to create, in my opinion. And we have intentional communities here in the United States. Here's a big one, the Amish.
Well, I'm sure you guys have heard about the Epic City, the 402-acre development down in East Plano, Texas, in your backyard. And we need to talk about what's going on there because Governor Abbott just announced that he was investigating. You can see here an announcement that came up, and it says it's because of discrimination. This is from the East Plano Islamic Center. They're saying this is linked to Sharia law, and actually they're going to be potentially having that there. And so there's criminal investigations that have been opened. Obviously, the developers are claiming Islamophobia and we have freedom of religion, and this is just a development project. But then we find out that they actually did not even submit the initial building permits. And so Texas ordered them to stop this immediately. So what do you guys think is going on here? Is this Islamophobia or is this just protecting Americans?
I was listening to an interview with some of the initiators of the project, this Muslim guy, and he was talking to the interviewer about how they were essentially working the system, and he was very open about it. He wasn't saying, oh, they're just overreacting or whatever. No, he was literally trying to appeal to the Muslim community, and he was saying we figured out a way to get around the system and to essentially keep anyone that's not Muslim out. And he admitted, like, we can't do it. We can't legally keep them from coming in or whatever, but we've done everything that we can do to exclude them, and to make it to where to put a boundary between us and them. One of the crazy things is if you live in this place, they're using our HOA system, essentially make it to where if you live there, you're not just paying an HOA fee to keep the neighborhood looking nice and and the shared grass looking nice or trees or whatever. They're doing a really, really high HOA fee essentially to pay for the local mosque. So you're being forced to pay for the religious practice and the religious system in the area, if you choose to live there. So and I'm like, there's got to be something either constitutionally wrong or just the law of the land. There's got to be something in there, and I don't know, but it seems like it's not right. Like that's what it seems like.
Yeah. They're exploiting the system, basically, is what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, and so this area includes residential housing, educational institutions, senior living facilities, recreational amenities. And the allegations are, there's financial violations, housing violations, consumer protection laws. There's lots of issues there. I've been the president of HOAs before and involved in that. And there's things you can do that, but it doesn't supersede law. I think they're right to hit pause on this, and especially gives me pause because they didn't even submit it says the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality found that the group behind the proposed Epic compound did not submit the required permits to begin construction. So they haven't even done the basic initial thing to begin the construction. It's one thing to finish your basement without getting a permit, but to start a 402-acre construction like this without that, that's quite a different thing. And I think that it gives credibility to the allegations that are being made. It's like, hey, if they're not even going to go about starting this in the right way, the legal way, then what should we really expect that they're going to follow all these other things for the other areas as well?
Right.
If I can push back against that, I would say the real story here, and the reason why it's hit people the way it has, is not because it's like, are they following the building permits and stuff like that? It is this idea of having a Muslim community that's specifically just for Muslims in Texas. That is, and then as I saw people, and I don't know how exactly true this is, but them trying to carve out their own place to have Sharia law. And practice that, in Texas, basically be like, we're following a different legal system here than in other places. And this is kind of akin to what we have happening in Europe right now, where we do actually have Muslim enclaves. And that's the police don't go there, and they more so police themselves, and they're just reproducing what they have in Pakistan, but now in England cities. So that's kind of what people are like, that's, is this good? Is this bad? and then somebody trying to stop it is that anti-freedom of religion. I just want to direct you guys your attention to what they're doing essentially is an intentional community. That's what they're trying to create, in my opinion. And we have intentional communities here in the United States. Here's a big one: the Amish. You might have heard of the Christian intentional community called the Amish, and that's exactly what they do. They have their own, they follow their own kind of laws. I mean, their own way of life more so than laws. They're not really against, the United States laws, so to speak, except for that they don't join the draft. They're excluded from a few things like that because they're just, they somehow have carved out their own intentional community with their own system, and that's the way they live. And so I would kind of push against you guys and say, why do we allow the Amish to do that, but we don't allow the Muslims to do that?
My one thing is, I think it has to do with the Constitution. It has to do with the Bill of Rights. There's a couple clauses in there. One is the Establishment Clause, and another one is the Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause says the government cannot establish a national religion. And now there's a kind of a sticky situation there. Is if you're letting them govern themselves, they're kind of doing that in a sense. But then also we do have the right to exercise religion, right? Religious liberty. But when there's a conflict there, or when there's a conflict of interest between the laws of the land and the Constitution and how somebody is operating and actually practicing their religion, it comes down to the courts. So I would say that's why is at some point, I'm guessing the Amish went to court. At some point a judge ruled this is allowed, and that for that to change, it'd probably have to go to court again, and then it would have to go up to the Supreme Court eventually if it couldn't be decided on. So I would say that's probably what it is. It's probably the judicial system has made that decision at some point. Now that's a guess, but even if that hasn't happened, it could happen. And that could be the way that you could start to frame that.
I think this is a great comparison, Reese, that you made. And Troy, you made a good point, because there are, I was just looking, my wife and I have interacted with Amish communities back in Iowa, and they know the laws. They know what's going on. Like we talked with them literally, and they're like, hey, can you sell raw milk? And he's like, well, yeah, 2 weeks ago, the Iowa legislature passed this and this. So now we can sell it to the public. But it's only for animal consumption, and it's like, but they couldn't before. They could only use it among themselves. So like, they still have to follow the law, but they can have their own things. Like, so even the Amish, like there's education exemptions where like they still have to educate their kids a certain way. They can do their own practices. There's roads and adjustments that are made for them. You put the signs on the back of their buggies, to be on the roads and that sort of thing. And there's other things like that, but they're still under the criminal, they're still under criminal law. They're still under child welfare and abuse laws. They're still under property taxes and sales taxes. So these are things that if you look into Sharia law, those are not the same in Sharia law. And so that would be a significant shift that would happen under Sharia law. They give specific ways for crimes, and there are different women's rights and different, a lot of differences there. And so I do think that it's right to nip this before it happens, because you can see the direction that it's going.
Right. I think it's going to, my point was, if they're not doing something about it now, I feel like it is going to wind up in the courts eventually, and unless Congress gets involved, but eventually I feel like it would wind up there'd be a case of, well, this is what the law says, but this is what happened to me when I drove through this neighborhood. This is what happened when it's like, well, how do we decide that? And, and I think that would eventually undo the whole thing. If they're not doing things right to start with, probably better to call them on it. It's not even just like the building permits and all that kind of stuff. Like they're already doing things outside of the law and in a way that nobody should be building a community. So
the problem though is that it gets sticky because like constitutionally we have certain rights. If you're a citizen, you're a taxpaying citizen, you do have certain rights to be able to do certain things. But then it's kind of like, how do you nip that in the bud? Because you're going to have to, it's almost like we have to allow some of these bad things to happen in order for the courts to step in and then do something to fix it. And how do we do that?
I agree to a certain degree, but the thing is, in the actual permitting process, you have to discuss things. And so when you go to get a permit, you got to go share your plans. You got to go actually talk about your governing documents. You got to go and so, there's checks and balances along the way. And normally, they're hurting working, like I had my someone I know that's a landlord that the city pushed him for a year. They got to put this big concrete pad, and he kept saying, "Just come look at it, just come look at it," you know. And then they finally came and looked, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it doesn't make any sense to put a concrete pad there. Yeah, you shouldn't do that."
Right.
And it was like 3 different people, administrators that he had to go through. I mean, it was ridiculous.
But
assuming
that everything is done the right way, they could still technically build this little community with the mosque, with the schools and all of that. Like if they were just actually doing it the right way. And the outcry is that it's going to turn into Sharia law, but there's no evidence of that yet. So it's kind of like a waiting game. Like
and that's where I'm
putting them on those fronts right now for sure.
Right.
But like later on, if they do get it figured out and they do it legally, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to one of the things that I'm hoping that obviously we've seen it happen a little bit, and I'm hoping doesn't happen, is that I'm hoping it's not just a case of a public dissension against Muslims in general, in the sense of, I'm hoping it's not just a Texas saying we hate Muslims, because that's not my stance. And, as a Christian, that's not my stance. And as an American, that's not my stance. Obviously, we disagree with a lot of things that they believe. And, there's been a lot of conflict there, especially in other nations and even some here on American soil. But I'm just reminded of, I had a conversation with somebody I met in California a year ago or 2 years ago. And this was right after, a month later after the October 7th attack in Israel. And he said, we were sitting down and having a hamburger, and he was a young man, and he was saying, "Hey, my best friend is Muslim." And he was a Christian. He's a Christian. His best friend is Muslim. They grew up together. They were in high school together, best friends. He said they didn't talk about religion very much. But now that this October 7th thing had happened, his family, he was over at his friend's house. His family's talking about it. They're all, and so it's like, and he's having a real hard time because he at his house, his family's talking about it, and he's hearing two completely opposite sides. And he was asking me, he literally looked at me and said, "How on earth do I talk to my friend about this? And, what do I do? How do I?" And it was like, and the only advice I could give him was like, "Hey, you're a Christian. So," I was like, "you can represent the love of Christ to him, but also you can give him the facts in a loving way at the right time." So it's like, it really comes down to, I'm going to treat you like a human being because you are a human being and you have the same rights that I have as a human being. I'm going to treat you like an American citizen because you are an American citizen. If you are, and you have the same rights that I have as an American citizen. But also, I'm going to let's look at the facts. And I think that's what needs to happen here is we need to look at the facts of what's happening right now. And then also the facts of what have they said is their intention. And I think that's going to matter. And then, like Doug said, if something happens eventually, it's going to have to be dealt with, so we're going to have to wait and see what actually takes place.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest concerns actually is, and this might be a super hot take, but I really don't actually like our governor. And I think that he is only doing something about it because of the pushback. Like this has been ongoing for years. And it seems as though every time something happens in Texas, he's like, "I guess I'll do something about it to make people happy." But I don't have like very specific reasons why I don't really care for him, but I don't. And there's something going on there. And I think that there's a lot of cronyism happening behind the scenes. And there's a lot more things going down that we are not aware of, and we need some clarity. I think that's what's really going on here. This is all very muddy, and I don't think anybody knows what's happening, and we need to know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. To peel back my brain just a tiny bit for you guys, the reason I was pushing with the Christian Amish things, because I have two different things happening in my brain, where I think I have the more I would say like classical liberalism influence happening, and then like the American freedom of religion. It's just like, yeah, if we have Christian intentional communities, then like why can't we have Muslim intentional communities here in the United States? It's like that fair is fair, right? Freedom of religion, all that kind of thing. However, I will say that portion of my brain is quickly getting beat out by essentially the rest of my brain that is developing a worldview that essentially is liberalism is the door to the death cult. I honestly think, and this is a larger conversation maybe we could get into later, but I really believe that what we have in the United States, which came about from philosophers in the 1600s when they created classical liberalism, is a philosophy that only works and it only made sense because they were steeped in a culture that was hundreds of years of Christianity and only works in hundreds of years of Christianity. And then now what we have today is neoliberalism, which is the same ideas of individual freedoms. However, we no longer have the culture. that backed it up. We don't have a culture. So what we have in the United States and largely in the West is a vacuum of culture where we say, well, no, we're not going to have any culture, don't have any state-sponsored religion, don't have any state-sponsored culture. Everybody just be cultureless. Nobody offend anybody. Let everybody believe whatever they want to be. And in the private sphere, you can believe what you believe in your heart. But in the public sphere, we will be neutral. We're going to be completely neutral. And the problem with that is anytime you have a strong, that's not how humans work. Humans, we get our identity. Culture, the way to define culture to me is it's a civilizational story. It's a story that tells you who you are, who your people are, who your nation is. It's a story. And we get our identities from stories. So as soon as you have a culture that comes in that has a strong story and a strong culture and says, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, it steamrolls liberalism completely. And this is occurring in Europe right now. Europe's culture has been neoliberalism for so long, and a vacuum of religion and a vacuum of these things. And they have way more Muslim migrants than we do, way more. And they are steamrolling Europe, completely steamrolling Europe. If Europe doesn't do something about it, the Muslim world could easily take over Europe within a few decades if the migration patterns continue, because they have a strong society that's centered around their common culture, and the West just doesn't. We don't have a culture anymore. We've vacated our culture. And we're a void, and it gets filled up. And it's the same reason why the left has been taking over all of our institutions, because they have more of a culture than the neutral culture. They have neo-Marxism, which is like a twisted substitute for traditional Western culture. It's like an inversion of that. And so they can take over, and the Islams can take over, but everybody that wants to stay in the middle and be like, all right, guys, let's just get along, just get steamrolled. So I'm more right wing now. I'm more like, you can call me a Christian nationalist, because that's probably what I am at this point. I think we need to reinsert Christian culture, or we're just gonna get steamrolled by everybody else.
Yeah, and Dallas actually has
I think
populations, Muslim populations too. There's a lot here in this area.
And what's it called? The community, intentional community. That's what the word you use. So America was founded as an intentional community based on the Bible and the way the three, like that is America. That is the biblical basis for the law. And so when, like you mentioned, Troy, if they end up going the legal route where they want to actually have a religious-based intentional community, then it's not going to fly, because then their documents will need to be brought forth, and they need to show that this is what they really want to do and that it's a conscious thing. And then here's the documents, but they're going to be they all conflict with the U.S. Constitution. They conflict with the laws of the land. So it just wouldn't be able to work. And so I think they would probably continue to go this other route where it's sort of this deceitful thing that's what they want to do. Or even if it wasn't affiliated, a more sneaky route, it wasn't affiliated with a Islam group, then a community could come and do it and then follow all the rules and all that, and then they just sort of start moving in the people that they want to move in. But then if they're not violating other things, I mean, that's where you're saying, Doug, you kind of just, it has to happen and you have to catch it. And that's where people just need to be aware of what's the reality and what's happening. And
well, the problem though is that you can subvert the laws. And I think one of the issues that needs to be raised and really needs to be focused on is the fact that HOAs can literally suspend some of your constitutional rights in certain situations and circumstances because they're private entities. And so you can do things like suspend the First Amendment because of certain requirements within an HOA. So if they're subverting, maybe they do get things lined up, and then they use the HOA to implement certain things like, hey, you can't actually have Christian paraphernalia in your yard because that goes against the HOA, which is supported by all of these decisions that the courts have made over the years. And it's like, what do you do with that?
You're talking about within a private institution, essentially. Yes, that they can do that. Be careful though, Doug. You're treading on thin ice right now. You're in the presence of a former HOA president.
I will say that there is pretty strict limits on what an HOA can do. I mean, I think that to me the most significant thing is if somebody doesn't pay their dues, then they get paid after the bank gets paid. They get, or taxes, so it's like, that's a lien against the house. Like but there's no, they can't say, they can't tell you can't display flags in your yard. I don't think they can stop religious symbols That's
Well,
not.
it depends on the area, though, right? Like it depends on the county, on the state, and what laws have been passed through the court systems in those.
But
states.
if it's a constitutional thing, that's different. That's I mean, then you could go to the court.
Yeah.
They say it, then you go to court and deal with it. But I mean,
Well, I think
Go
what
ahead.
Doug is hinting at is a lot of these cases we have unconstitutional things happen all the time in this country, and they just go on for a long time until somebody way up
until it goes to the courts.
I know I've heard of those stories where you have
Okay, I
HOAs
see.
or you have like, well, this is a private group, and so therefore,
Oh, yeah, I see where you're going. I did have an experience with. So I was on one side of the street. President of HOA, moved across the street, was a different HOA. And so it was actually because one was like townhouses and the other one was like single family home. So I had a big sign, and I leave my Christmas lights up all year. It says Jesus. It's like a 6-foot Jesus sign on my garage, and it's a light. And so I got a letter in the mail that says, hey, show me a sign, Lord. And so it's on my house all the time, lit up. And I got a letter that's from the HOA that said, hey, you need to take this sign down because you can't have permanent signs unless they're directional. And so I thought, I'm just going to ignore this. But I said, technically, all I have to do is put a one-way sign above Jesus, and it's now directional. And it actually is directional already. So one way to heaven. And so I was ready. So I just ignored the letter. I didn't get any other letters. I was a little sad that I didn't get to go to the city council and argue that case. But hey, maybe next time. So
that's funny.
That's awesome.
See, you can find the loopholes. Everybody can find the loophole.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.